We are going to have some audience questions, but first I want to just start off the conversation. You know, when you first came out here and asked everybody if they considered themselves innovators, I was backstage so I couldn't see, but I'm just going to guess.
But you stood up anyway.
I stood up anyway.
Okay.
But I'm going to venture to guess that not everyone stood up. Is that right?
You know, I think by the time we asked the "Do you help innovators"
Yes.
question, we had about 80%.
Right. But the first question, and Sean Kanungo was here yesterday, and he challenged everyone to consider themselves innovators.
Yeah.
And he was talking about, regardless of your discipline, he was clearly talking to all of these financial and treasury professionals. So I'm curious, you know, you talk about propelling an idea forward. He talked about wanting everyone to consider themselves innovators. And I'm sort of curious, how did they get there? How did they exercise that muscle? Because, you know, you talked about Salman Rushdie.
Yeah.
And Salman Rushdie's job is to write books. So he doesn't need to be inspired to write. He just has to write because that's his job.
Yeah.
Well, some of these people, their jobs are to deal with balance sheets and financial statements and cash flow statements.
Yeah.
And it's not their job to sit around and start to innovate, to create ideas, to generate ideas. And so I would love to hear from you, what would be your advice? What can they incorporate in their day-to-day? One of the things you talked about was, you know, identify problems, put it on a sheet.
Yeah.
What kinds of things can they do to incorporate in their day-to-day so that they become idea generators and innovators themselves, not just support those?
Yeah, so often, isn't it, that we come up with ideas, but we're in the middle of other things, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, wouldn't it be cool if that happened? But by the way, I have 8 hours of work to do right now, and so how am I going to like think about that? And I think that one of the things that people do, there's a couple things I'll share. One of the things I think we should all have is some way of tracking these ideas, right? And it can be, you know, I'm cheesy. I carry around a little notebook, you know, reporter-style notebook. I sort of find myself to almost be like a little investigator, and I kind of do it that way. But, you know, it can literally be a note, an open note on your phone, right? And as ideas come up, you want to just jot them down, just so you don't forget them. And, you know, if I can't convince you to do that because, you know, it's good for you and good for the business and good for creativity, well, maybe I can convince you in a different way, which is that as long as you have other ideas that are floating on in your mind, you can't be fully present with the other work you're doing. So something may come up, you might say, you know, there's a better way to do that, but I can't focus on that, I want to focus on this. You won't be fully focused on this. You'll be thinking about that, at least with, you know, a little bit of your bandwidth. So literally just having a sheet, having a note. Some people use Evernote. There's a new app right now called Bear, which is a pretty good note-taking app, and just having a running list of your ideas. That's one thing. Step number 2, though, is that I would really encourage you to spend just a little bit of time every week or every month where you sort those ideas. You go back to that list and you don't even have to take action on them, but you literally sort them from top to bottom. Which idea am I most excited about to which idea am I least excited about? I have a friend who does this with index cards. So every time he comes up with an idea that he's thought about more than 2 or 3 times, he'll write it down on an index card. And then every week, what he'll do is he'll sort that index card deck from top to bottom, most excited to least excited. And then what he finds is that week after week, there tend to be 2 or 3 ideas that really just stay at the top of the pack. And when you have those 2 or 3 ideas that stay at the top of the pack, that starts to kind of hone you in on, all right, I'm genuinely excited about this. I genuinely think it's a really good idea.
And for these financial professionals, I mean, one of the things that they do very well is identify problems.
Yeah.
So can it start with a problem that they're having, and then they write that problem at the top of their notes and then start thinking about ideas all week?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, you know, it's interesting because I think that the people in this room are probably privy to most of the ideas, because I think that the lack of ideas or the wrong ideas tend to show itself in the data, right? And if the data looks a certain way, it's probably that something's off. And so being, you know, I think sort of willing, and I think with again, I know spare time is very, very precious if non-existent, but you know, in an efficient way, being able to spend some time sort of going deep on that and understanding what that is. And sometimes that's just asking questions. You know, the idea of finding an earned secret that we talked about, Tony Hawk went to the skate park, right? But you don't necessarily have to go to a skate park. You could literally go to a colleague's desk, somebody who you don't talk to on a day-to-day basis, but somebody who you know is kind of involved, and just ask them if you can grab coffee or jump on a Zoom and ask them a few questions. Just like the way you're interviewing me right now, I mean, I think that we can have more of these conversations. We start to understand what other people's worlds look like, when we do that, we start to connect dots that we've never connected before. And when we can connect those dots, we start to become more valuable, right? When you walk into a room, how interesting is it when you walk into a room and say, well, I looked at the data that I was supposed to look at, right? That's one thing. What if it was, I looked at the data, and by the way, I went over there and I talked to Alex, right? Who we never talked to, and here's one thing that I learned from that conversation, right? I have some new information that we hardly ever talk about in this meeting, right? Now all of a sudden you're starting to help yourself connect dots, but you're also starting to help other people connect dots.
Right, and you've also introduced the fact that you talked to Alex, and so you're inviting other people's opinions.
That's right.
It's interesting. So I actually, when I first heard about your idea of coming into a room with conviction, with your ideas, I thought, I actually kind of pictured Popeye, after he eats the spinach, like guns a-blazing, ready to go. And I thought to myself, well, that might be intimidating. Are you really having a growth mindset if you do that? Are you really inviting other people's opinions? You talked about just now, I talked to Alex. You share with me now. You talked in the presentation about how you get everyone to give their egg into the cake mix. So I'm just curious, though, what can we do to really make sure that we invite everybody's opinions to the table? You talked about a few things, but there's one secret ingredient that you and I talked about backstage that you personally use so that people are more receptive to you when you walk in the room. So you come in and you say, this is not a fully thought out idea. I'm inviting your opinions.
Right.
You come in and you really want everybody's opinions. You say, I talked to Alex. What else do you personally do? I really want you to share with them because it's really important, I think.
Yeah, we had a good conversation backstage, which is, it was interesting for me because I wrote this book called Backable, and I literally handed my manuscript into my publisher in January of 2020, right? And all of a sudden, within 6 weeks, the world completely changes, right? And so we're operating in a different world of being backable now than we were before. And I think one of the biggest things that has changed, and I know we're gonna learn more about this when we have a speaker come talk to us about burnout, but one thing that has become very apparent is that when we walk into a room, we are a combination of both our information and our energy. Information and energy. But especially for people who are more analytic, right? We are focused almost entirely on information, right? I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna deliver this information. But the reality is, and this holds true, by the way, even if we're operating through digital screens or we're in the room, people can sense your energy. And that energy that you're bringing matters just as much as the information that you're bringing. So what does that mean then practically for us? Well, it means that we have to pay attention to both. So one of the things I do is I coach people who are about to walk into big meetings, big moments that could change their lives. And I ask them if they're ready, and they say, yeah, I am ready. And I say, great, what are you doing right before that meeting? And they're like, well, I'm dropping off the kids. I'm gonna, I've got 5 other things to do. I'm going to another meeting. I'm like, whoa, wait. You have to give yourself a little bit of time to get yourself into that right headspace before you walk into a meeting, because it really does matter. Actually, let's try something together.
That's good.
Yeah, I want to ask everybody, just try this with me. I want you to stretch your arms out just a little. Put your arms out in front of you.
Me too.
You too, Eva. So arms out in front of you, okay? And I invite you don't have to, but I invite you to close your eyes, okay? And now I just want you to tune into I want you to loosen your fingers, right? So that they're almost just a little bit there's a little bit of a curve. It's almost like you're holding a very soft beach ball. And then I want you to tune into your fingertips. And what you're probably feeling right now is a bit of a tingle sensation. Okay? Now I want you to straighten your arms completely, and I want you to sort of bring your fingers together. So there's no distance between each finger. They're all tight. They're tightly pressing against one another. And now tune into your fingertips. And if you're like most people, you're probably not feeling that tingle sensation as much anymore. Now listen again, just one last time. A little distance in between, and tune back into that tingle. Okay, you can bring your arms down. What you just experienced there is really the difference between information and energy. You walk into a room and you are tight like this. You may think you're putting on a good act, but the reality is that everybody kind of knows, right? Even subconsciously. Everybody knows. But one of my favorite stories of all time is the story of a guy named Dr. George Schaller. And if that name doesn't sound familiar to you, he was a famous primatologist. And what made him amazing at his job is that he was able to get closer to mountain gorillas than really any other researcher. And no one could figure out why. Right? Why is it? So finally, he's at a conference, kind of like the one we're at right now, and he's presenting his research. And finally, somebody in the audience gets up and says, Dr. Schaller, I don't get it. Why are you able to get so close to these mountain gorillas? And Dr. Schaller says, it's simple. I never carry a gun. Never. I never carry a weapon. And that was really confusing for people because they were like, well, we carry weapons, but we carry it in our backpack. So it's not like we're waving a gun around. And Dr. Schaller's theory was, yeah, well, you can hide a gun, but you can never hide your attitude when you're carrying a gun. There's always going to be that little thing, that little bit of tenseness that you have. And he never wanted that. And people could, because he knew that gorillas would be able to pick up on it. And so you're really trying to get yourself into this energetic state, you know, and there is some vulnerability that comes with that, but you are not coming in like Popeye. You're not coming in hard charging. You are literally coming in loose because we know counterintuitively that people who are loose tend to perform better. I mean, if you look at fighter pilots, for example, one of the first things a fighter pilot will learn is that when things get really rough, when things get really turbulent, you cannot tighten up. Right. In order to be the most effective in those tight situations, you have to counterintuitively learn how to loosen as things get more stressful.
And you're going to come out with a book to tell us how to do just this, right?
Yeah. That's what I'm working on next.
All right, because I have to tell you, I don't know about all of you, but like you said, my fingers started to tingle, and just that idea that I could feel more. Maybe my energy projected into that room would be better, but also then I'm probably more receptive to what everybody is saying.
100%. You're more receptive. You're more open. I mean, I think that the misperception that we can sometimes have, and it's understandable given where we are right now and how busy we are. But we really have been told that success is a combination of hustle and grit, right? And it's not to say that those are bad qualities. Actually, they're very, very useful qualities. But the problem that we sometimes ignore is that if you look at the qualities of grit, right, relentlessness, doing whatever it takes, being always on, these are also the same qualities that are scientifically associated with burnout. Right? And so it has us on this really strange sort of path where we are all of a sudden realizing that the road to success and the road to burnout look almost exactly the same. And so if we're not finding ways to loosen, if we're not finding ways to replenish ourselves, we're really just on a fast track to being used up.
Right, and I'm sure that everyone in this room and in the virtual room can identify with that. And I'm going to ask the people who are giving me these questions that are coming in from the audience to make them a little bit bigger because something's going on with my eyes right now. But I'm going to squint. So somebody asks, most of your examples involve in-person interactions. What are the best practices to translate these tactics to Zoom? Yes, the world we live in right now.
The world we live in, yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that's interesting is that as I started to kind of look at companies who are reacting to what was happening in the world post-March 2020, one of the first things I heard from leaders was, oh my God, what is this going to do to our overall level of creativity? Because isn't it the in-person interactions that really, you know, juice our creative abilities, right? But as it turns out, by the way, there is some truth to that. There is some kinetic energy that we get from being around one another, which is why I think being together today is so useful for those of us in this room. But there's also some truth to the reverse, which is that when we are in person, we oftentimes what will happen is that the loudest voices in the room will drown out everybody else, right? And we know that the loudest voices in the room aren't necessarily the smartest voices in the room. We know that they're not necessarily the most creative voices in the room. So one unexpected, I think, benefit for the creativity and innovation of companies has actually been that some of the distribution has taken that, or at least minimized that factor a little bit. You know, one of the things that I've seen companies start to do now, they did as a reaction to the pandemic, was they started to do what they call brain writing. So instead of brainstorming when we're all in a room and we're all kind of shouting our ideas, brain writing is where we actually write our ideas out. One company that I've studied recently actually did this in a very creative way, which is literally they just open up a document, and at the top of the document, they'll write the problem that we're trying to solve. As a team right now, we need to optimize X, or we need to find a way to cut budget on this, right? And then what they'll do is they'll have everybody pile their ideas into the document without writing their name. So you don't know who wrote that idea. And then they'll go in and they'll +1 the ideas that they like. So now all of a sudden, people who may have never spoken up inside a room, or maybe their voice was too quiet to really be heard because they're not sort of that table pounder personality. But now all of a sudden their idea holds equal weight. And so there are certain things. One of the things I think I would challenge all of us to do is as we start to pull into a new normal here, where I think maybe going back to work in person is actually going to be part of that, we should also think about what actually did work, right? What were some of the things that we reacted to, didn't choose to go that direction, but we went that direction, and it may have actually turned out to be better.
Right, because we often have that dynamic in a big group meeting where people are kowtowing to the highest paid person in the room, to
That's
the
right.
loudest voice in the room, or maybe the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts haven't been full bore at a company, and someone feels like they come from an underrepresented group and they don't really feel comfortable speaking up. So that's true. I think that even when we're in a meeting, there are things that we can learn from Zoom, like you said, that we can use those, maybe one-on-one meetings, maybe inviting more opinions anonymously, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And I also think that on the flip side too, with Zoom gives us the ability, I think, to connect to a lot of people. But on the other side, also has, I think, jammed our schedules with these back-to-back meetings, right? And it's crazy. I literally was talking to somebody the other day who said, like, I need a catheter because I do not have time to go to the bathroom.
That's bad.
Because it's literally just meeting after meeting after meeting, and you're expected to just be on. And so one of the things that I think that I've seen, people who I think are really backable, really creative, I think good at what they do, and they're leaders as well, as they set the example this way, is they do 55-minute meetings. 55-minute meetings. To just give everybody that 5 minutes, including themselves, to reset before they go into the next meeting. And it may sound like one of these sort of feel-good things to do, but the reality is that if you take those 5 minutes, it actually is scientifically proven to show that the other 55 minutes become much more effective. And look, we can pretty much always do in 55 minutes what we do in 60 minutes. If we know we have that amount of time, we're always going to get it done. So just giving yourself these little reset periods, I think, are really important, especially in the world we're in today.
Right, I was just at a conference where there are no Zoom Fridays, 45-minute meetings max, and take time to breathe hour every day where you cannot email somebody.
That's great.
No, yes. You can't have a meeting. Sorry, you can email, you can text, but you can't have a meeting during that 1 hour day.
I want to work there.
I know, okay. All right, so we want to get to some more audience questions. Suneel, how do you balance a new idea with management that is unwilling to change the status quo?
Well, I think that's a tricky one, right? I mean, if management is not willing to change, I think that's a deeper issue with the company, candidly, right? It's a deeper issue with the organization. I will say that, oftentimes when I'm talking to leaders, they're saying that, look, we want to change, we need the right idea. And the reality is that everybody is afraid, right? I think one thing that I think I underappreciated is one thing that we've talked about today is how risk averse really everybody is, right? Sometimes I've talked to a bunch of you, and you've sort of classified yourself as like, I'm not a risk taker. I think the reality is that most people are not. Right. Even venture capitalists in Silicon Valley who I spent time with, these are people who place their early bets on places like Instagram and Facebook and Netflix, and they actually are not great risk takers either, or they don't want to take risk. They're afraid of making a bad decision. And so I think that one of the things that we need to do is we need to show, and I think the people in this room are really well equipped to do this, is to show with trends, to show with data how the risk of inaction is greater than the risk of action, right? We change, by not changing, you're actually making a decision too. You're not actually choosing not to do something, you're choosing to do something. And that thing, maybe you're choosing to be left behind. And I think that is something that the people in this room are really equipped to do through the use of data.
All right, Suneel, I wish that we could spend all morning and afternoon with you, but I know that you have a few thoughts to share, and I'm just going to sit here and enjoy while you take the floor again.
Well, thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. So, one of the things that I just want to wrap up with a couple quick thoughts. One is that there is a PDF that is in the app. So it's just summarizing all of the thoughts that you heard today. So it'll be nice and simple. I created that for you. It's in the app. I want to wrap up with the story of one of my favorite backable stories, and it's about this woman. Her name is Damayanti Hingorani. And what I love about Damayanti's story is that she's extraordinary. She was written up in Time magazine as a pioneer, but she grew up in a refugee camp right on the border of Pakistan and India. No running water, no electricity. And she had this really unlikely dream, though, which was that she wanted to become an engineer with Ford Motor Company. And her parents got behind the vision. They saved every rupee they had. They got her on a boat to America, where she got a scholarship to Oklahoma State University. And the day after she graduates, she drives to Detroit, Michigan to apply for her dream job. And she finds her way into a room with the hiring manager. But the hiring manager, he looks at her application and he looks at her resume. This is her big backable moment. And he says, wait a second, are you applying for the job of an engineer? And she says, yeah. And he says, I'm sorry. We actually don't have any female engineers working here right now. Because see, this was the 1960s. And while Ford Motor Company was in its heyday at the time, they had thousands of engineers on staff. Not a single one of them was a woman. And so deflated, Damayanti Hingorani gets up and she picks up her purse and picks up her resume and she begins to walk out of the room. And then, almost in this last minute dose of courage, she turns around, she looks this hiring manager in the eyes, and she tells him her story about all the sacrifice that it took for her to get to this country, to get to this city, to get to this very room. And then she says to him, look, if you don't have any female engineers on staff, well, things are changing. Do yourself a favor and hire me now. And it was in this moment, this backable moment, that this hiring manager goes out and he decides he's going to fight with his bosses. He fights with his bosses, he fights with his colleagues, and he gets Damayanti Hingorani a job. In 1967, she becomes Ford Motor Company's first ever female engineer. And I love that story because Damayanti Hingorani changed things. She changed things for immigrants, she changed things for women in the workforce, and she also changed things for me. Because you see, Damayanti Hingorani is my mom. And if a hiring manager from suburban Michigan hadn't taken a chance on a refugee from the other side of the world, well, then I wouldn't be here right now to share her story with you. So as we go out into the world, let's not just think about how to make ourselves backable, but let's find good people and help them become backable. Because sometimes the easiest way to make our mark on the world is by taking a chance on someone else. So thank you so much.
Oh. All right, you did it. You made me cry. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.